Hi, book friends. Welcome back to another episode of Most Bookish. I am Amanda, your number one book friend, and I wanted to add forward to this video that you're about to watch. You'll notice once it gets going that it was filmed in a different time of day, time of year. I was wearing different things. It's going to be pretty obvious. The video was a review of Prince Harry and Matthew Perry's memoirs that had come out early in the year. Prince Harry's, I think, came out at the end of 22 or the very beginning of 23. And then Matthew Perry's came out a little bit after that. I felt like they were similar enough to do a video together. They were both beloved figures to different groups in different ways. And there were some parallels and comparisons that I felt like were valuable in the same video. Either way, between one thing and another, I kept pushing back the release date. And in the interim, it gets announced that Matthew Perry has passed away. My first feelings were ones of tremendous sadness and a feeling of loss. I felt like crying, to be honest. I was a bit surprised by my reaction, but in thinking about it, I realized Chandler Bing has been in my life for longer than some people, longer than most people. When I've been low or happy or anxious, Chandler Bing and the cast of Friends have been there to invite me into the coffee house and make me laugh until the dreamland takes me away. They always make sure I have cheerful dreams. While, as you'll see in the video, his death was not necessarily surprising given his history and the chance. While, as you'll see in the video, his death wasn't necessarily surprising because given his history, the chance was always a bit higher that that would happen to him. It was still startling. Startling in its lack of the unexpected, startling in the depth of our response to it, and startling that he had finally reached the destination that he had been fighting against for so long. I was frustrated with him in this video, and I was frustrated with how wasteful and heartbreaking so many of his decisions as an addict were. I grew up around addiction, and it just felt like the same old story, and I wanted him to be better than that. But alas, he was one of us, human and fallible. And the remembrances after his death made me realize that that's what we had always loved about him. I will miss him every day. And I hope he's okay now. Hi, book friends. Welcome back to another episode of Most Bookish, where we are talking all things books, all the things that we love. By we, I mean me. All the things that we don't love, still, I mean me. And all the things in between. And hopefully you'll enjoy hearing a little bit about your latest, greatest, most favorite book out, or maybe one that you hadn't heard of, and you will check it out based off of some of the stuff that I've told you. Or maybe you won't. Maybe some of the stuff that I've told you will make you realize you're not going to spend your money on that. But we don't really do that around here. So if you find something that you're unsure of, maybe get a sample, see if it's worth buying. With that said, this week's episode is about the newest, I don't know if there's a newest, but the newest, most sensational, I guess, or sensationalized autobiographies that have been released at the end of 2022, beginning of 23. It's two of them that I'm talking about. And the first one, unless you've been living in the middle of nowhere, you already have heard of. It is Spare by Prince Harry. Spare by Prince Harry was written with a ghostwriter. It's not Prince Harry on his own, and he has very openly admitted that he's not a big books person. So he had a lot of interviews with a very well-known ghostwriter who's written bestsellers in the past, most notably the Agassi autobiography, and his name is J.R. Moehringer. I think that's how you pronounce it. Moehringer? I'm not sure. Either way, that guy helps him write it, and you can tell that the ghostwriter is a very good writer because the book is beautifully written. The other book that we're talking about today, which I'm guessing you have heard of, because it is the first autobiography to come out of the Friends camp since the original show started airing. The only one of the cast that has been known to publicly divulge this much information outside of specific interviews, which the other cast members have done over the years, but obviously nothing to this extent. And it is Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. Now, why, one might ask, would we be talking about both of these books together? This is Chandler and our favorite Diana's son, Prince Harry, who has gotten complicated recently. They don't have anything in common. Well, actually, they do. They are both iconic men who we have all had a very specific perception of for decades, built up around the circumstances around them, built up around the lore created of them, built up around what we wanted to believe of them because of our own misconceptions, biases, created worlds, whatever it may be, whatever team you were on, you have an idea of who these guys are. And I would argue that both of these books have, I don't want to say debunked, but they have challenged and, for me personally, shifted those ideas and those perceptions about these two men. It's a very interesting lens from which I feel like I see them now. So let's jump in. We're going to start about a little bit of information for each of the books and how they've done, because, you know, do people really want to read these? And the answer, my friends, is yes. The first one has been in the news forever. It is not only Princess Diana's second son. It is not only the beloved Prince Harry. It is not only the man who has been in a lot of tabloids because of his marriage with Meghan Markle and the way that the press has treated that union and the, I guess, fricassees. I don't think it's the right word. The brouhahas that they have gone through very publicly because of the tabloid press. It's not just that. It is also that this is the first time, to my knowledge, that a British royal is divulging family secrets. A British royal is speaking in the first person about how the British family functions, about the inner life of some of the key figures that we have read about in news for however many decades, depending on how long you've been alive. Obviously, there's also the fact that this is coming from an American lens versus a British lens, and this entire review is based off of an American lens because I am American. But that family has held a certain fascination on both sides of the pond, if you will, for my entire life. And it opens during a period of time that we have all had questions about. There's an entire show called The Crown based around this family, and everybody was waiting for the season when Prince Charles and Diana get together to really kind of see what was actually happening, obviously.
One day, dear boy, you shall be king. Your duty now was the choice of a woman that people will love as a princess, and in due course, as queen.
The crown is fictitious. I digress. Everybody has been waiting for this book for a myriad of reasons, but that is a big one. And the first day sales showed it. It is the highest selling nonfiction book of all time for that publisher, which is Penguin. 1.43 million copies sold on its first day between the United States, Canada, and Britain. Suffice to say, as one reviewer put it, the only person who could have outsold this Harry was the other Harry. So people bought the book, even though there were a bunch of spoilers beforehand, there were leaks, there were people talking about it. They think that that actually made people want to buy it more. Now, at this point, usually you would see me holding up my books for the video, but I'm not. I'm going to be pointing like that because I did not buy these books, the physical paper version of these books. I bought the Audible version of both of these books. I will be buying some Audible books. I usually only read or listen to Audible books that are autobiographies. I like the whole vibe that they have going on, especially with a lot of their contemporary autobiographies where the author or the subject of the autobiography, if it's written with a ghostwriter or a writing partner, is narrating the biography. It gives it a whole other vibe. And I also feel like you get the story in the voice that it was intended to be heard. So sometimes I will be doing, again, maybe some historical stuff, but really mostly autobiographies. And there are times where I do an Audible book and I love it so much that I buy the physical copy. I have thought about buying Spare, but I didn't. I also will not be buying Friends, Lovers, and The Big Terrible Thing. I want to say the title is a lot, Matthew, and I wish you had made it something else. But regardless, I won't be buying either of them. So again, I will continue to point. It is, I will say, a great way to get your reading in while you are mobile. I tend to like reading actual books, which gets cut off by the fact that I commute a lot for work, and I'm still able to keep up and actually read multiple books at the same time because of Audible while I'm driving. Now, don't recommend Audible when it's boring for long trips because it's an easy way for you to want to go to sleep. But if it's a good book, definitely check it out. If you haven't tried Audible out, absolutely worth it. I digress, as I always do. The format of Spare is, like I said, read by Harry. At the start of the story, it's a little bumpy. He's not, I would say, kind of a very natural narrator. I think that he needed to practice. So it's a little staccato at times and a little stiff. But after the first chapters, he really gets into a rhythm and you start to hear his voice come through. And he's actually a pretty good narrator. And it makes this kind of guy's guy come off as likable instead of, you know, especially when he's reading his teenage stuff, instead of being a young dumbass, it comes off as a man looking back on his childhood foibles, if you will. Now, Friends, Lovers, and The Big Terrible Thing, which is the Matthew Perry autobiography, and like I said, the only full autobiography that's ever been released from one of the Friends castmates, is read for the Audible version by Matthew Perry. You immediately realize that there's something going on with his ability to speak clearly. If you saw the Friends reunion, you could see he also was struggling during those interviews, and his explanation for that was that he had had some very painful oral surgery. I'm not sure if he was reading this book during that same time. I'm assuming that it was his choice to read it that way, or during that time, or despite his noticeable difference in speech, because he wanted a true accounting of his story from where he's at, and where he's at this place in his life is damaged from the different things that he's been through and his substance abuse problems and struggles for many years. And I don't know if he's still talking like that, if he'll always talk like that, but he made his choice to still read it himself instead of having somebody else read it. I'm assuming because, again, he wanted it read in his voice. He still is able to add his inflections and kind of the way that he talks, and like, are you kidding me? Could it be? You know, it's still, it still comes through. It's still Matthew Perry. Again, it's just, you notice the difference from the very beginning. He had no ghostwriter. He has said in his story that he has started writing, and he's written for film, he's written for TV shows, and he sat down to write this himself. The publishers also wanted to keep it in his same voice. They're not interested, from an article that I read, they said that they're not interested in kind of cranking out these famous celebrity autobiographies that are inauthentic. They're trying to be as authentic as possible, and that's a part of why the entire story is just Matthew's writing. I will say, because of that, it's not as polished as, let's say, Spare is, because it's just a different caliber of writer. Is it horrible writing? No, but there are some things, if you pay attention to things like that, which I do, that are repetitive. They are not as streamlined and clean. The story is a little bit fragmented in certain places, where instead of continuing the timeline seamlessly, he will backtrack a little bit and then move forward, or he will move out of timeline seemingly following a thought of his and then come back to the current timeline, and that throws you off a little bit, especially when you are hearing it versus reading it on a paper. A lot of times you can jump around more easily like that when you have a written word, because there are certain visuals that you insert that point to you having gone somewhere else, parentheses or a different font or spacing can be used to do that. Whatever the case is, you're letting the reader know you are someplace else for this period of time, and then you come back to where you were. Let's say you're telling a story and you're talking about 1980 when you were in high school, and this somehow leads to thoughts that are based in, or an event that is based in 2015 as an adult at your job, and they're somehow linked, you would change kind of formatting on the page, or however it is that you were telling would deviate at that point. And then when you're bringing us back to 1980, you would use some kind of physical marker, if you didn't use a written one, to take us back to 1980. When somebody's speaking that, it's like translating a book into a movie. There's a lot that's lost because you can't necessarily translate what you see on the page. You can't translate also like people's thoughts. It's just really difficult to go straight from one to the other. In autobiography, it's a lot easier to make a translation because it's really just somebody's spoken story. But with this particular autobiography, it's a little fumbled. From time to time, he's talking and you realize, okay, but he went that way and then he goes back that way, and you're like, oh wait, where are we right now? The other thing that he does quite a few times is repeat himself. He has interludes throughout the story where he comes back to a present situation, something that he was going through in his recent past when he's writing this book, and he's chopped it up into segments that he plunks into his life story. So he'll talk about his childhood. Well, he starts the story in his present day or recent past, and this scenario of where he's at with his struggle with sobriety, and then he launches into his childhood. At some point you get another interlude, then he launches into young adulthood, or he continues the story into young adulthood and talks about his lead into Friends, and he tells a whole portion of there, and then you get another interlude, and so on and so forth. The thing is that, let's say he finished this interlude talking about, and I was taking 55 pills a day. He'll come back to the interlude and give you that information again, not as a continuation of that first interlude, but like as a retelling of that information. And he does that in a few different ways, and so that kind of is a little clunky as well. So again, it's just not an experienced author who has written 5,000 books, and it shows. With both of these figures having been so public in certain ways, you might say, why were these books so anticipated besides everything that we touched on at the beginning of the video? The other part of this is that, in a weird kind of juxtaposition, both of these men have been so extremely public, and some of their struggles have been so extremely public, but they have never really talked about them in their voice. Now, Prince Harry has kind of been on a road to doing that over the recent past with the Oprah interview, with the Netflix special that he and Meghan did. So you've already started to get a sense of who he is, but this is a full telling from the start to the end. And really, the Meghan story is at the very end of his book, and you get so much more of who Harry is than you really had anticipated. For instance, there is I think, conception of Harry being Diana's son. That is his kind of primary relationship to his parental figure. And it's the lens through which a lot of us see him. That is Diana's son. And while we all know, obviously, that is also Charles' son, there's not this kind of narrative of fatherhood, at least not in the States, that links the two together in a really visual way, the way that even still, despite the fact that she's been gone for so long, his relationship with his mother is reiterated and put in full view and focused on the times that you've seen Harry and William being kids with parents and love and interacted with in a way that we're all accustomed to, playing with your kids, hugging them, laughing with them, talking to them. All of those really big visuals that you have of the heir and the spare, if you will, is around really Diana interacting with them. And so while it opens with Harry having found out that his mother has died, and as a reader, you may have been waiting for the Diana revelations to begin in obviously a morbid kind of way, but to pretend that the fascination with Diana is not still real and alive would be false. But that's what you're expecting. He dives directly into the day of the car crash and how he found out, how he was told by his dad, where his mind was at that age, and you're expecting some more of that. And what you end up actually getting, and what you get throughout the rest of the book, is really a look into his relationship with his father. Now, a lot of the media coverage, I feel like, has been around negative things that he has said in the book about his father. When people got their hands on early copies, they wanted to sensationalize him, maybe not being flattering about his father being a self-conscious person, maybe a jealous person, maybe a person who is more concerned about his reputation than seems flattering to say. But we kind of knew that version of Charles from all of the things that have been written and all of the works that have been made and things that Diana said in the past, and just kind of our perception of how that whole thing broke open. The part that we didn't see is that he's a complicated man